Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat. We are going to start in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Thursday, 29th of October 2020. Welcome to our International Trade Press Conference of the International Hardware Fair Cologne. Welcome to Konrad Adenauer Hall. Katja Kaspari, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished representatives of the media, distinguished partners, welcome to Konrad Adenauer Hall at Koelnmesse, and also a very warm welcome to our listeners and viewers at home in front of the screens for our European Trade Press Conference for the International Hardware Fair 2021. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you here today. This event is very important for the International Hardware Fair and for Cologne Trade Fair, and it's very meaningful because all companies want to get back to the trade fairs and hope that they can start their trade fair visits fairly soon. We will talk about the highlights of the International Hardware Fair 2021 today, share some facts and figures with you from the industry, and we'll present an interesting panel discussion to you. Now, before I introduce Dieter Könnes, our facilitator here today, you might know him from WDR Service Time, I would like to ask someone else to come to the stage, and that is Matthias Becker. Matthias, please come up here. It's a surprise. You don't have to say anything. Now, Matthias Becker, for 8 years, has been the director of the International Hardware Fair, so he is an expert in the field, but he will celebrate his 20th anniversary on Saturday with the Cologne Trade Fair. And we would like to thank you for these 20 years, and we look forward to the next 20 years and to rock with you the European and International Hardware Fair. Now, you don't have a microphone, you don't have to say anything. We just wanted to surprise you. Thank you. And now we can start, and I would like to ask Dieter Könnes to come to the stage. Thank you, Ms. Kaspari. Now, as you can see, we're adhering to all COVID-19 standards. We are wearing face masks. We're also keeping a distance, and that is necessary today. We all are aware of the time we're living in, and unfortunately, this also has an impact on our work, on our press conferences like the one today. It's a hybrid event, and Just think of the trade fair in February, what it's going to be like. Some will be able to be here as part of the on-site event, and many will be part of the virtual event because it's going to be streamed like we're doing it today, and you'll be able to follow today in German and English. Here we are in the Konrad Adenauer Hall. We'll have a panel discussion here up front in regards to the hardware fair and also COVID-19 standards. So we'll get more into detail in a moment, but I can promise you that it's going to be very interesting and we're going to cover different aspects. One note to everybody who's here on site and to all our virtual participants, you're welcome to ask questions. We're going to do that at the end of the event. You'll also have the possibility to have one-on-one interviews. And those of you who are planning on asking a question, please go ahead already, ask your question in the chat. Then we'll be able to get to it at the end and make sure that the right person gets to answer your question. Now, for me, it's a real pleasure to be here on site and to speak to at least some of you directly. We've grown used to not being on site, and this is a first step. And that is actually a good segue to our topic today. It needs to be possible to meet in some way, and if you look around, you can see that everybody here is keeping a distance. And of course, in addition to that, we have our virtual side of the event. Now, we'll hear two brief presentations, and then we'll have our panel discussion. And then, as I said, you'll be welcome to ask your questions. Now, that's for me. And now I would like to welcome Oliver Frese, the director. A very warm welcome on behalf of Koelnmesse to this European Trade Press Conference on the International Hardware Fair 2021. It's a little weird to talk about it now because it was supposed to happen in 2020, but as you know, at the end of February, this would have been one of the first events that then had to be cancelled, and we moved the date to 2021, which is why it's called the International Hardware Fair 2021 now. Now, as we've just heard, it's nice to be able to meet again, at least with some of you, and that's what we want. We want to create points of contact, and we are very happy to have you here in Cologne, but we're also very happy to have all those participants who are following online. And this is going to play an ever more important role in the future in international trade fairs. Now, in spring next year, and with that, the International Hardware Fair in February are very important to us because those are going to be the first events to happen as hybrid events, and the International Hardware Fair may be one of the very first hybrid trade fairs. Now, we as Koelnmesse invested in infrastructure on the one hand, to modernize the premises, and on the other hand, to develop the Exhibition Hall 1. It's going to be finalized soon, and then we're going to continue to invest because we're convinced that this is a top trade fair that can be among the best. And we have been focusing on digitalization with DMexco or Gamescom. We've had two very interesting and fascinating formats, and we have learned much with these formats. And here at the Cologne Trade Fair, we can say that when it comes to hybrid events and digital events, we're among the front runners. And I'm sure that the International Hardware Fair is going to benefit from that. Now let's have a look at the trade fair in 2021. We are going to get the motor running again. There are some essential elements that you need for your business. You need business platforms. Those are the engines for your business success. It's all about change. It's about transformation, digitalization, sales, communication. And with that, I can say that it's very important to have trade fairs, to reactivate business relationships, and at the end of the day, to establish new business relations. You want to expand and reinforce your existing business and also meet new business contacts. Now let's talk a little bit about trade fairs. Some have happened even this year. The digital community has given us strong signals, very positive ones. At the same time, we are looking forward to meeting again socially. We have our five senses, and to experience those five senses, we need to see each other, meet each other, and talk directly to each other. The International Hardware Fair was moved from 2020 to the year 2021, and so the following year we are going to have the next edition, and then from that point in time on we are going to have it in that 2-year frequency again. Now, we know that this year has been a very special year with the coronavirus pandemic. We know that this requires special organization and preparation. So we have the hashtag Be Safe for Business at Koelnmesse, and that means that we make sure that everybody can keep their distance and adhere to the hygiene standards. And with that, the International Hardware Fair is being planned in a way that you have more space, broader hallways, and you're welcome to go to the Exhibition Hall 9, where we have an entire village where journalists from all over the world, if they can travel, can come here, have a look at this new concept of trade fairs in these times. Now let's have a look at the exhibitors. This is what you're interested in, I'm sure. Now for 2021, we already have some figures for you. However, we know that with all the current changes due to the pandemic and resolutions, decisions from politicians changing every day. However, we can tell you that 2,762 exhibitors have applied already, and we'll have 2,474 international exhibitors, 288 coming from Germany. Now, this shows how well accepted this trade fair is, and that also from abroad, exhibitors have the desire to come here and be represented. Now, this should be a networking event. where you can show your innovations and meet interesting people. Now, let's have a look at some of the big players among the exhibitors. You can see that they are all part of it, and of course, we are communicating with them to see what standards we all need to be safe. For communications with visitors, this is going to be very important. Now, on the other hand, we have our DIY Boulevard together with the HHG, the German Association of Home and Garden Manufacturers, and the European Association. Together, we have come up with that new idea of an international boulevard, not only 250 meters you can walk along to see everything regarding home and garden, but also 40 exhibitors coming from Germany on 187 meters and 13 international exhibitors on 52.5 meters that you can walk along in our boulevard. Now, let's have a look at next year. Of course, the target group is the hardware and tool trade, and those are the ones that can come here and travel to Germany. At the same time, we'll also be expecting commercial users and representatives from online retail. We know that this segment is ever more important today. Now, we have a focus on Europe, and especially with the current situation, overseas visitors will not be as present as we are used to traditionally. So this is going to be an event with a clear focus on Europe. Now, a trade fair is more than just the exhibition. You need the exhibition, of course, that's one element. You need the conference part, know-how exchange, networking, everything that is happening in such an event. It's about the experience and worlds that you can experience on site. And then the fifth dimension, the outreach. So that means the contact to the world beyond Cologne, beyond the on-site event, and that is why it's going to be a hybrid event that you can experience online. Now, let's have a look at the event program for the International Hardware Fair 2021. We will have the e-commerce area, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We'll also have special exhibitions with interesting topics for the hardware industry. 5G is going to be one of them. So campus networks, and you'll experience the Nokia factory in a box, show you innovative applications and forms of realization and implementation, to show you how industrial production with 5G can be implemented. Our second special exhibition is a tradition by now, we must say, and that is going to be the 3D printing. We'll look at trends, at current examples, what is possible already in the hardware sector. Now, we have talked about the DIY Boulevard already, and we will also get to know the winners and the products of the International Eisen Award. This year we had a digital award ceremony, and the winners will be part of the DIY Boulevard and present their products to us. And as I said, it's all about networking and know-how transfer, which is why we have a cooperation with the German Federal Association of Materials Management, Purchasing and Logistics. And you'll have the opportunity to learn everything about steel procurement, but also cryptocurrency or blockchain. Now, one special topic, as I said, is e-commerce for us. It's a mega trend in the current transformation in trade and retail. And I'm sure that also for the International Hardware Fair, that is very important, and that is why we'll have a side event on the 23rd and 24th of February on 2 of the 4 days. We will have that e-commerce area. We will show you innovative, disruptive solutions, strategies for trade and retail, and topics like search engine optimization, multi-channel strategies, and so on. We'll be able to listen to very renowned speakers like Michael Artuk, who's also here today. And I'm sure that you're all interested in meeting eBay, Facebook, and other tech giants who will be part of this trade fair. And I'm sure that this can give us very interesting impulses for our work. Now, on the one hand, we are going to have the International Hardware Fair here on site in Cologne. At the same time, it's also going to be a virtual event, and that is why we have the Hardware Fair at home. As I said, when it comes to digitalization of trade fairs, we are one of the front runners. We're doing what is necessary to be part of the top digital players, and we want to co-design this international digital ecosystem. And we're not only going to stream the on-site event to the virtual world, but really implement a hybrid trade fair. Not everybody is going to be here in Cologne. We know that already. However, we want to make sure that those who will not be able to travel can really get in touch with our exhibitors. So we are going to have space for product presentations. We'll have live stages where we are going to stream everything that is being said and done here, so you can be part of all the innovations that are being presented and the keynotes, etc. There's going to be a World Cafe, networking opportunities, everything that you'd experience here on site when you're going to have a cup of coffee. You can do that also virtually. You'll have the opportunity to be part of that. There's the discovery graph, and with that you can look at possible matchmakings for your networking and find those who have a well-matching profile. at DMEXCO that worked fantastically. So right now we are looking for a tailor-made solution for the International Hardware Fair for February of next year. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a lot of information in little time on the International Hardware Fair 2021. We have paved the way. However, this is posing a challenge to all the participants. It is a very challenging situation. So the implementation of any kind of event is special today. However, we are in touch with all exhibitors almost on a daily basis, discussing the necessary measures and standards. Thank you very much for your attention. Welcome again, and please enjoy our panel discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Oliver Frese. You can decide freely whether you want to sit on stage or in the audience. Digitization is in the focus today, and you just heard that a big advantage for our colleagues who are connected online is that we do not hear their smartphones. So to all those who sit here, I would like to ask you to mute your smartphone. So digitization is the buzzword, the magic word, so to say, and we are going to hear about that today. Presently, I'm doing research on cybercrime, a very interesting project indeed. Cybercrime, by the way, has surpassed drug crime when it comes to the sales. And maybe you heard a couple of weeks ago that Düsseldorf University clinic, a hospital, was subject to extortion. So maybe you get afraid when you hear that, and then people say, okay, given that situation, we are afraid of digitization, while others say, well, that's the very reason why I do not yet have an email address. But, well, the question is, are we talking about the risks or about the opportunities? I'd rather talk about opportunities. So we cannot withdraw from digitization. And I'm happy that today some more will join us on stage who will talk from practical application. Welcome with me Wolfgang Kirchhoff, the CEO of Kirch Group and chairman of the advisory board of the International Hardware Fair Cologne. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Kirchhoff. Well, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of the International Hardware Fair Cologne, first of all, thank you very much to you, Mr. Frese, for your introductory words, and in particular for having presented the new hybrid concept of the future International Hardware Fair Cologne that will take place in 2021. It will be unique. And I think it will not just present a challenge to all of us, but an opportunity as well. Today, as I've done during the last few years, I have the pleasure to give you information from the different sectors that will soon exhibit at the next International Hardware Fair Cologne. Well, first of all, the good news is, regarding the overall status, that most of the industries represented here have developed positively despite the pandemic, and this in particular applies to the DIY and the home improvement sectors. Well, unfortunately, we have to say up to now, because given the situation in Europe, we haven't yet reached the peak of the pandemic. Nevertheless, there is a remarkable development during the second wave of the pandemic. Well, the bad news is that the pandemic is ongoing, and consequently there is great uncertainty across all industries. Some sectors have fared better than others, and in particular the tool industry, on behalf of which I am taking the floor today, has focused on the export business and therefore had to suffer quite some losses. Now, when we talk about DIY and garden improvement, the European associations and the worldwide associations, in this case EDRA and GHIN, can look back on a record year. And this development is expected to continue in the medium term. There are several key drivers for this. Given the lockdowns, end consumers have increasingly discovered the importance of their own homes and have invested accordingly, also into their gardens. So they really started investing into their homes and gardens. Moreover, customers appreciate the consistency and the high safety standards provided by do-it-yourself stores. The sector has successfully demonstrated its system relevance during the shutdown phase. And last but not least, like in the last few years, the do-it-yourself sector is benefiting from the new desire for change. Now, when we do not just look at the European and/or the global markets, but focus in particular on the German-speaking countries, namely Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, the so-called DACH area, we see that retailers can report rather positive figures. Germany, 11.8 billion. That's a plus of 15.6%. Austria, 1.5 billion, a plus of 8.3%. Switzerland, 1.7 billion euros, a plus of 3.5%. These were the sales figures of the first half of the year, and the upward trend is likely to continue in the second half of 2020. Now, the members of the Manufacturers Association, House and Garden, report increased sales in the first half of 2020, despite delayed or interrupted supply chains as a result of the lockdown that we had in spring. However, we see different developments with regard to the pandemic, differences between Germany in particular and Europe as a whole. So in Germany, we are recording a year-on-year sales growth of 9.3%. The main growth drivers here were accessories, hardware, and in the whole of Europe, on the other hand, we are seeing only a slight drop in export sales in comparison with the previous year. This is rather natural because many countries outside of Germany were affected differently by the lockdown. When you, for example, look at Italy, France, Belgium, there were much stricter rules and regulations and restrictions, and therefore the population and all the customers were not so willing to invest into their own homes and gardens. Now, when we look at the hardware trade, we can see again that there are different pictures here when you compare DIY and the hardware trade. The hardware trade was very much affected by the lockdown because hardware retail stores were subjected to temporary closures during the lockdown phase. There are differences with regard to developments within this sector, because on the one hand, in the hardware retail industry, some part of home and garden is affected and money is invested there. But on the other hand, of course, we have the production connection trade. So this had different developments in the production connection trade and the hardware retail trade in particular. So we had heterogeneous trends here. Hardware household goods retail sector managed to make up for many developments, but we have the classical subdivision between the entire sector, the industry, and the do-it-yourself and home improvement sectors. There's no need to repeat that this also affects the building hardware specialized trade. You see different trends here as well. Now let's talk about the tool industry. Talking about the tool industry, we can see the differences. Let's wait for the right slide to be shown. Well, we see that we had losses in the month between January and August, more than 10% in Germany, but much more affected, for the reasons I elaborated on before, were losses in the export business. In the export business, when you look at the UK, you have losses to the tune of 23%, and in the United States, minus 15%. And unfortunately, we have to assume that these losses will not be compensated in the course of this year, given the present situation. Nevertheless, in the second half of the year, the business has kind of revived a little bit, and this is due to the survey conducted by the association. Only 27%, only in quotation marks, considers the current situation to be unsatisfactory. Nevertheless, that is an improvement compared to the month of June. In the industry, in the sector of the tool manufacturers, the share of those who engage in short-term work is rather small. In August, it amounted to 70%, and presently it has decreased to 52%, which, ladies and gentlemen, is still a very high figure. Now, when we dare looking at the year 2021, we can see a picture which basically shows that there is cautious optimism, but those questioned say that there are only single-digit sales increases. Now, when you compare that to the crisis which we had back in 28-29, the so-called financial crisis, then you can see that at the end of the financial crisis, this V-curve was different. There was a plus of 25% at the beginning of the year 2010. Given the present developments of the pandemic in Europe and all over the world, and against the background of the existing trade conflict which we have at the international level and at the European level, and given the imminent Brexit, this is certainly not going to repeat itself. So when we look at the year 2021, there is more restraint when it comes to optimism compared to the time 10 years ago. That is the reason why the entire sector, not just the tool manufacturers, but the entire DIY and the house and garden associations and the hardware trade are full of expectations at the 2021 International Hardware Fair Cologne. All of us are aware of the fact that this is one of the leading trade fairs, which is normally a global trade fair, although, as Mr. Frese said, that this time we are going to have a European focus next year when it comes to physical attendance, but there will be a digital international attendance. And it's the event that constitutes a showroom for most innovations. That has been the case and will continue to be the case in the future. And all of us are full of expectations when it comes to the hybrid format of the trade fair, the digital format, the digital reach. The digital reach, and being an exhibitor, I would like to compliment the Cologne Trade Fair. The digital reach is a considerable asset given the present pandemic. And for us as exhibitors, it will be quite interesting to see how this can translate into opportunities, and we will not so much focus on the risks. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish all of you an interesting discussion here on the panel on stage. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kirchhoff. I think you can remain seated because we will immediately add to this discussion round. Mr. Frese, I would like to ask you to take the floor as well. And there are two empty chairs. Jürgen Hammann, Dr. Jürgen Hammann, I would like to ask you to join us on stage as well as Michael Artuk. A warm welcome to all of you. Well, we already presented the gentleman to my left and the gentleman to my right, Michael Artuk, rock star, operating a web shop, and father of 3 daughters, of course, very important indeed. And Dr. Jürgen Amann, Chief Executive Officer of Koelntourismus. A warm welcome to the two of you as well. As I said at the outset, this is an interesting discussion round. And for those colleagues who join us, will receive a simultaneous translation into English, so we can continue to speak German. Mr. Frese, you talked about one of the first hybrid trade fairs. Let's Rock is more than just a program. How important is it for you to really start or get going? Well, that's of elementary importance for us as Koelnmesse. You can imagine that this year, well, since February this year, we didn't have a single trade fair, which is very difficult for the entire trade fair industry in general, but for Cologne in particular, because this doesn't just affect Koelnmesse as a company, that also has an effect on everything surrounding the trade fair business. Those connected to the trade fair, services, hotel, catering, and every euro that is earned here at the trade fair will increase 7 to 10-fold for the region. And that's why it's so important to be connected again and to boost our industry. And we really feel, as representatives of the industry, we want to offer a platform for enabling the different sectors to start doing business again. And we want to convert that into reality as soon as possible, Mr. Kirchhoff. That's one of our tasks. Well, Mr. Kirchhoff, we said at the outset that you are here in a dual function. You are a member of the advisory board, but you're also here as an entrepreneur. And in your capacity as an entrepreneur of Kirchhoff Automotive, can you tell us how much the industry was affected by the crisis? Well, we are very much affected indeed by the lockdown and by the fact, which I mentioned before, that the sales channels have been very much affected in this industry. Here we have double-digit sales losses, sometimes even higher than that. And the export business, from the German point of view at least, exports from Germany into other European countries or even overseas, has also suffered a lot from that. What have you done up to now? Was that a reaction, or were you able to really act? Well, who had been able to foresee the pandemic? Well, unfortunately, we as entrepreneurs had to react, something which we dislike. And that has got to do with adjustment of costs. This has got to do with trying to struggle to make ends meet. And during the first phase of this pandemic, that had been our main task. And I think most companies have been able to do that quite well. There's another entrepreneur sitting here on stage, somebody who is laughing and seems to be quite relaxed. Michael Artuk, why is that the case? Why are you so relaxed in this crisis? Well, it's kind of unpleasant to say that, but 2.5 billion was our sales. We earned a brutal amount of money. It was unprecedented, the orders we had, because we are very much marketplace-oriented with our own shop. We really benefited from the crisis. We have not been able to cope with all that. We couldn't have sold more. We couldn't have increased the speed. Well, you are engaged in a stationary trade, you deal with tools, but you also have an e-shop for tools. So can you talk about the ratio between a stationary trade and the e-shop? Well, stationary, nobody wanted to drop in, but we benefited from people no longer wanting to enter shops. We won many new customers, Amazon, eBay. We got connected to so many marketplaces. People were not able to shop anywhere. Who wanted to go shopping at that time? I didn't want to go shopping. I didn't want to leave the house. I wanted to order everything online. Do-it-yourself stores had a lot to do. Yes, they also had double-digit sales increases, and something which isn't new. Well, unfortunately, the pandemic is new, but in times of economic difficulties or at a time of a recession, the situation is such that in many areas people have to work short time. But this is something where the DIY business thrives, because people, when they sit at home and are stressed as a result, they try to embellish their homes and gardens. Well, I saw the pictures, 100 people standing in front of the do-it-yourself stores. I said, well, without me, I will order everything online. Okay, now there are 5 of us sitting here in this round, and of course, all of us were affected by the crisis, both in our private life, but also in the stricter or broader sense of the term in our professional life. Dr. Jürgen Ammann is here as well. He is the managing director of Köln Tourism, Cologne Tourism. I hardly dare ask you how you are. Well, of course, the situation is not good for us. Mr. Frese, Koelnmesse is a very important part of Köln tourism. When we talk about tourism, we can say that 2/3 of tourism it happens in hotels where business customers stay overnight. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that must not be neglected here. Let us stress. You said that 2/3 of tourism of the city of Cologne happens via the Cologne Trade Fair. Just to show you the dimension, comes from the Cologne Trade Fair, from conferences, from profitable business trips. And in 2019, we had 6.6 million overnight stays. 4.4 are accounted for by business trips, and this is very important indeed. A lot of jobs are dependent on that. And when you ask me how I feel, I can say that I'm unhappy about the situation. But I was lucky. There are many working in the tourism, people who are self-employed, and others who are very much affected by the situation or by the restrictions that were decided yesterday for the month of November. And your industry will be very much affected by that. Everything has been put on ice, hasn't it? And the nice word of proportionality comes up here. My question to you is, with regard to your industry, do you think that these measures are proportionate? Well, we have done our homework. The Cologne Trade Fair has done their homework, safety concept, digital tools. Everything seems to be safe. And I think it's a kind of disproportionate to impose this kind of lockdown on the entire hotel and catering business. Many investments have been done into safety concepts. You can see that. Be safe for business, I mean, that shows what has been done. And to impose a lockdown on this area where it seems to be easiest, I think it's kind of disproportionate. Well, a question to you, Mr. Ammann, another question to you. We are talking about digitization. The digital hotel room is something that doesn't yet exist, does it? We discussed that with Mr. Kirchhoff. We can only react. How has your industry reacted in the end? Well, of course, you're right. A digital Gamescom doesn't lead to overnight stays in hotels, but it serves to show how we in Cologne were able to cope with the challenges. We are one of the most digitalized cities in Cologne, according to a recent survey, and we have been able to cope with this challenge, to come up with new hybrid format, to use digital tools. And I think this will improve our reputation. And we need to discuss that together, and then we will be able to leave this crisis with an improved reputation.
Now, digitalization and trade fair, it sounds contradicting. Usually a trade fair happens on site. You go to a large exhibition hall, you meet people personally. And now we're talking about digital transformation. So what's the situation here? Well, we started with the Web 2.0 in the 2000s, and many of us said, at some point we won't need trade fairs anymore. And that's not what happened. With a lot of analytics and surveys, together with our partners, we looked at new formats, like the ones for Gamescom and DMexco. Now, two industries that are tech enthusiasts and offer digital products, and still those companies didn't want to have a completely virtual trade fair, like where you click on a booth and then you only enter virtually on your computer. That's not what our partners wanted. What they asked for was an addition to the physical on-site event. So it's not one or the other, it's both. It's the exhibition, conference, and networking here on site, and maybe even 365 days a year, 24/7, to have access to the virtual platform, and maybe once a year have the on-site event. That is not contradicting. We all want to revive the trade fair business and look at that now through the lens of the International Hardware Fair. Is this going to get the motor running again? Well, it's going to be one of the very first hybrid events after our personal lockdown, so to speak. And with that, we can show what we have been able to develop over the past weeks and months to now have that hybrid format of the on-site event and the virtual addition to it. And that's why it's even more important to start that new concept in February next year. And the participating companies, especially those coming from digital worlds, want to get back to meeting people personally. And that is why, like back in the medieval times with the marketplaces, people want to meet at such marketplaces still today. And that is important for the companies and their representatives, right? Yes, business is being done from person to person. That's still the case. Now let's have a look at the business world. Of course, many things of your daily work, you can do it online, you can exchange information, and so on. However, direct communication is still an important factor in the business and the relationships between humans. And with all the positive aspects of a hybrid format, we can still say that the physical trade fair is of utmost importance. Now, the hardware fair, you think of haptic objects. Maybe for a Gamescom that's different. However, for a hardware fair, I can't even imagine how that could happen virtually. You're trading with hardware. Well, a product has certain features and contents, and you can show those digitally even better than you could do on site, because it depends on who is presenting the product, right? And one clear advantage is that you have a much larger reach. So, of course, when you have hand tools or tools in general, those are usually offline products. However, you have that multiplying effect when you go virtual. A larger reach. Now, if I look to my right, I think someone is smiling. Mr. Atuk, if you've learned one thing over the past 20 years, it's probably that e-commerce has a much larger reach. Absolutely. We send packages to, I don't know where, India. Now, with a physical store, nobody would have called me from India asking me about the product. So that is globalization. We can send out packages to every corner of the world. So we pack the package, put the sticker on top, and then it's going to be mailed. And I don't worry about it arriving where it should arrive. I'm sure it does. Now, I'm sure that at the end of today's event, everybody will know who you are. But let's talk a little bit about your person. I started in 1995. I started with retail in the tools industry. I was 23 years old. Nobody took me seriously. Well, I could get along. And then 2001, and maybe the later, between 2001 and 2010, someone told me, you know, we need to sell at eBay. And I said, what's eBay? And we started, and it was incredible. Back then, you could sell and sell and sell. There was nobody out there selling tools. And still today, I must say, you know, why did we earn so much money? Why have we earned so much money up until today? Well, and yes, why is that? That is your personal success story. And if I may say it like that, the hardware industry is still a little slow when it comes to digitalization and e-commerce. Why is that? I don't really know. I just did it. And many others are afraid of taking that step. Just, you know, start small. You don't have to do it all at once. You have many opportunities. And I'm seeing that people don't want to be part of that changing environment. They're just content with what they have and try to be optimistic. And if you talk to advisors, you know, let's say you're at a large hardware corporation, then, you know,
they may say, ha, everybody is slow, so we can be slow too. And that's not what you should do. Now, I, on the other hand, then think, "Oh, they are going to be slow, I'm going to be fast." And, you know, if everybody's that slow, then that's good for me. So you'd say that that's what you need to do today. Well, think of those small stores. Everybody was lamenting that the small stores are being lost, but those owning the stores didn't do anything to keep their stores. And so I published a statement and said, you know, if you don't fight for it, then get lost. Well, those are strong words and a real criticism to the industry, really asking whether you're open enough for that transformation. Is there still room for improvement? Yes, there's much room for improvement. I agree that there are not many companies out there fighting to be part of that transformation. That's also true for my company. We're not doing enough. Now, why is that? Manufacturers and also the sales channels, excluding the digital ones, we still have very conservative, traditional customers. Now, if you look at consumer electronics or the car industry, then you see that they are probably 5, 8, or 10 years ahead of us. Now, that has to do with the situation that you just described. And yes, there is room for improvement, and we need to make sure that we are part of that and that we're not be part of the losers in the end. It is a great transformation. Could that happen, that you're left behind and that you lose and be not part of the digital transformation? Is it now due to the corona crisis, or are there other reasons for that as well? Well, we must say that when it comes to digitalization, we are quite progressed. We use our social media channels, and during the lockdown, we made sure that parts of Cologne reached people at home via online channels. Now, the question everybody is asking is, what is going to happen next? Will there be restrictions for hospitality, for restaurants and hotels? Will there be events or not? And what's happening next? And well, I think it would be good to know what the next scenarios are going to look like, to have a perspective of what's coming next. And that's probably also true for companies and self-employed to then know what is going to happen at the beginning of next year. Do you need to look for another job, or will you be able to reopen your business soon? And Mr. Friese is nodding. Well, also for the trade fair business, the measures were changing so rapidly. You had come up with one concept and hygiene standards, and then it was all changed, and you need to come up with another concept. Now, you said 2/3 of tourism is caused thanks to the trade fair business. So I'm sure that you're also looking forward to the International Hardware Fair 2021. You said we'll get the motor running again. Absolutely. And that's why it is important to get the motor running no matter what fuel you use. That's our mission, not only due to our commitment with Cologne, but also our commitment to the companies. And so, as the Cologne Trade Fair, we are very committed to welcoming the International Hardware Fair. Next year, we are in touch with the German and foreign companies. We are talking about the market situation, and we're looking at how we can design that platform for the hardware fair. We are in close contact to make sure it's working fine for everyone. And of course, we will have to adapt one or two things in the next weeks. Well, Mr. Artuk just talked about his personal success story over the past 20 years. Now, is that because he is a pioneer and an innovative entrepreneur? Or what do you think? Why has he been so successful, not only him personally, but also others? And why are others not as successful in that industry? Well, I don't really want to comment on that. However, if you're one of the firsts to do something that in the end becomes such a significant part of our world, and even if you start with small steps and you just do it step by step and you just continue to do it, then that will lead to success. And of course, a young, well-motivated group. So when someone comes to you and says, hey, boss, why not do this? Then you should listen, because that's probably where the new ideas come from. Always look out for new opportunities, seize those opportunities. That's what being an entrepreneur is. Well, it's easy to say, you know, look at the opportunities, seize the opportunities. You're coming from the automotive sector. Now, if you look at the automotive industry in Germany, the German flagship of the past 40 years probably, then we must say, when it comes to e-mobility, we're not such pioneers. We're lagging behind. So why is that? Were we not as innovative as others were? Because that is a well-known transformation. Why haven't we reacted? Well, today it's about hardware and the hardware fair, but I'll comment on it. Now, the German automotive industry, well, did we or did we not lag behind? I can say that. Now, if you look at Volkswagen, for example, let's say they develop products that people don't even want to use. They'll have losses, and their stocks are going down, and in the end, they'll get in trouble because of their shareholders and possible litigations. So you need to have incentives today in order to sell electronic cars. Now, in China, last year, they reduced the incentives and sales of electronic cars went down. So I cannot say that we're lagging behind, not at all. When it comes to connected driving, The German automotive suppliers have 2/3 of all patents. So let's talk again in 2, 3, or 5 years, and then I'm sure that once the market will be revived, and I'm sure it's going to be revived, then once you don't need the incentives anymore, I'm sure that the German automotive industry will be there to offer whatever customers are looking for. If I look at my own company, we used to present our products here at the Cologne Trade Fair when it was still called Domotechnica. And my father used to build microwave ovens, and not only the small ones that you are familiar with today, but multifunctional devices. It was very modern. Nobody wanted to buy it. He was ahead of his time. Yes, so if the market is not ready for a product, then no matter how innovative your product is, maybe a problem of communication as well. However, you'll have losses. So that is a very complex issue. You need to recognize trends, as you asked in your question, and you need to be brave and take that leap of faith. Yes, that's part of being an entrepreneur. However, if you're too early, not only if you're too late, it's bad. Also, if you're too early, if you launch products on the market too early, you could have a problem as well. And I could give you many examples of smaller companies who 15 years back launched electronic cars on the market, and they did not survive, not one of them.
Talking about innovation, that is the willingness to change. Michael Artuk, in your case, it was much easier because you didn't have to ask anybody apart from yourself. That's right. I just did it. I always like to do it myself. And in present society, 90% of people are talking about things without doing anything. And it's not sufficient, and I have to stress that, when you acquire something, a company for 130 million or so, when you don't know what you are doing, then either you don't do it or give me a call. I mean, 8 million minus or so, but you need to understand what you do, and it's not sufficient to buy a ready-made product. You need to understand what you do, and you need to have the right people in the right place. It's like with the apprentice. He also has to be the right one. I'm not just talking about the managing director. The willingness to engage in digitization, but also in innovation in the hardware industry. If you hadn't been your own boss, had you been one out of many in a larger company, maybe in the Kirchhoff Group, just as by way of an example, would you have been able to persevere with your ideas and visions? No, not at all. That's why the small ones have always been the winners. The small companies, the small, nimble companies have been able to do something without being prevented from that. And this is more difficult with the large companies. They cannot just do it. So that's the advantage of the small companies. Mr. Herrmann, in February, the trade fair will hopefully take place. And from the tourism point of view, would that be something where you say, finally, we can welcome people here in Cologne? I would wish for two reasons that the International Art Fair took place and was successful. We need tourism back in Cologne. We need people to fill the hotels. We need full we need full trade fair halls. We need that to secure jobs. And from the private point of view, let me say that I came in February to Cologne, started working here, and 4 weeks later the lockdown took place. And I really wish to see the trade fair grounds here in action, full of people. That's my private wish as well. A colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine from Dresden, gave me a call. He said, "What happens to you, Jürgen? You are hardly in Cologne and the hotels are empty." Well, I might say I leave Dresden and your hotel beds are empty. Well, I wish to be back in normal times. I know that it's a long way to go. It's not going to take place overnight. But sooner or later, we will see the city of Cologne packed, full of life. People will go back to the breweries, have Kölsch beer, the typical beer of Cologne. I'm looking forward to that. But together, we need to convey that sense of security. Cologne is safe. Everybody has done their homework. Each and every part of the services is ensured with safety and hygiene concepts. You cannot close your eyes to that. You cannot impose a generalized lockdown. That's not understandable. We need to discuss things, and then the guests will be back because the product is great. Well, that was a lovely closing word, wasn't it? We will near the end of this discussion round. There are many more topics to discuss. But, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frese, we heard about the private wish that we will rock again here next year. But all of us need to learn to live with this virus and with the surrounding circumstances. But to come back to that, Mr. Frese, what about your vision for Cologne as a trade fair place in 2021? I think this crisis will strengthen us. At some point, we will be able to do trade fairs again in 2021, I assume. But that's the reason why we are investing courageously. We invest into digitization, into the location of the trade fair, into product development, into new products, into new types of events taking place here in Cologne during the next few years. That goes beyond the international hardware fair. We firmly believe in Cologne, in the hardware, in the fairgrounds, and I think we will come out of this crisis in a strengthened manner. When we pave the way, we will be able to persevere in the international trade fair situation, not just in Germany, but all over the world. And that it gives us the impetus to continue to work for the benefit of our partners here and to strengthen our our networks. So that leads us back to the topic that we need to get the motor running again. Thank you very much to the four of you for your contributions. I think we would find many topics that we might discuss, but for reasons of time constraints, we don't want to elaborate on that. We would also like to give others the opportunity to pose questions. That goes both for the ladies and gentlemen present here in this room, and it goes for those who are connected to us via the live stream. So in case you have questions, please write them into the chat. And afterwards, there is also the opportunity to give interviews. The journalists can conduct individual interviews here, but we would like to give everybody the opportunity to pose questions. So those who sit here, would you please raise your hands? I see 2 hands. Would you please briefly present yourself and then ask your question? My name is Robin Meven. I come from Mark & Temper in Düsseldorf. Mr. Kirchhoff, you described the partially difficult situation in the industry. We heard that eBay is lining their pockets. Now, what about the effects of this situation on the prices and margins in our retail, in our trade, in the long run? Well, of course, Increased transparency will lead to more pressure on prices and margins, definitely. On the other hand, there are tendencies which I observe, and I mentioned that before. The advantages of products and product descriptions can be conveyed in a different manner. You do not just sell via the price, but also by presenting the features and product assets. You communicate them in a different manner. So my answer is yes and no, definitely. It's a fact that in the long run, nobody can avoid this sales channel. So if you say that we are not digital, I saw the analog hand, but there are also questions from Spain, namely, what about visitors? What will participation in the trade fair cost, and how many Spanish exhibitors have confirmed their participation? Well, I do not remember that exactly, but maybe the director of the International Hardware Fair, Mr. Becker, can answer that. Maybe you remember the statistics? Well, I'm not 100% sure. I think we are more or less at the same level. I am in constant exchange with the Spanish Association. We do not have main deviations from the 2020 event. So I think the picture is still quite foggy with regard to developments in Spain as well. But we can provide the answer in a digital manner later on. The numbers are more or less on the same level as the event planned for this year. And what will participation cost? A visitor's ticket? Well, we have entrance admission tickets which can be bought online. This time we have the special situation that there are no haptic paper tickets. One ticket costs about 50 euros for the entire fair, or you get an invitation by an exhibitor. Thank you very much. The gentleman here in the front, my name is Stefan Bartels. I have a question to Mr. Frese. You said that you have more or less a daily monitoring with exhibitors. Have you fixed a date when you would say we have to cancel, or we will only do that digitally? Well, of course, we need some lead time, obviously. We need some lead time in order to have a reliable event, to organize the event in a reliable manner. That will probably be 10 to 12 weeks before the event. It's not such a long time ago. Presently, we have 2,700 exhibitors, which is quite something. Before, we had about 3,000 exhibitors, so there's not such a big deviation. For this reason, we are kind of optimistic, but we are aware of the present situation. We need to observe developments. I think 3 months before the event, we will know what is going to happen. Thank you very much, Mr. Frese. Well, do not hesitate to pose your questions online, to feed them into the chat. Now the question to the audience here. Further questions? Yes, there's a gentleman over there. My name is Joachim Bengelsdorf. I'm from the Däne Publishing House. Recently, there have been different attitudes from among the organizers of the trade fair with regard to the organization of trade fair. And Koelnmesse always made some statements. What makes you so optimistic that trade fairs here in Cologne will be received better than, for example, in Frankfurt? Well, each and every trade fair needs to be looked at individually, and that's exactly what we are doing here in Cologne. We look at each and every event individually because we are talking about different industries here. When we look at Düsseldorf, for example, our colleagues in Düsseldorf had a very successful caravan event, trade fair, but they had to cancel the medical trade fair because this is a different industry. So we need to look more closely at our events, at our partners, at the exhibitors, find out whether they really want to go for it. Because we cannot wait on end until the pandemic is over. We need to take a decision at some point. So we need to look at that event by event. The furniture trade fair is different from the confectionery fair, which is different from horse racing trade fair or the hardware fair, different industries, different attitudes. We need to look at each individual event. And our colleagues in Frankfurt have taken their decisions according to their own portfolio, but the situation here might be completely different. The next question comes from the chat, namely, how open is the digital version of the trade fair for temporary non-exhibitors? We are convinced of hybrid events, and hybrid means that there will be a physical platform, and participants and exhibitors can use it also for digital purposes. But the focus is on those companies who shape the digital platform here and also use the digital version as well. That means the hardware fair at home. My name is Klaus Maulshagen. I'm a publisher of Eisenwarenzeitung. My question goes to you, Mr. Frese. In how far are you worried that politicians and the North Rhine-Westphalian regional government might simply prohibit the trade fair from taking place in spring in Cologne? Well, we have a constructive dialogue with them. Our shareholders are also composed of representatives of the city of Cologne and the federal German state of North Rhine-Westphalia, so we need to talk about that. And we are optimistic that we can go for it, that we can hold this trade fair. But we do know that once a situation materializes where it seems to be impossible, then we will be affected by that as well. But that will not come as a surprise because, of course, we are in constant contact and in a permanent dialogue with politicians and shareholders. There are no further questions in the chat. Anybody here from among the audience who would like to take the floor? Would you please raise your hands? Are there further questions? Obviously, that does not seem to be the case. Let me ask my colleagues once again whether there are questions from the chat. This is not the case, so everybody seems to be completely happy. And then that means that we can come to the end of our event. Thank you very much for your attention. We get the motor running again. That is the motto for the event due to take place in spring next year. And I do hope that this will really take place, that you will really be able to get the motor running again. Thank you very much to all the guests here. And ladies and gentlemen, let me draw your attention to the fact that afterwards you can also have interviews, get in contact with us, and we will bring you in touch with the gentleman here on stage. Thank you very much for your attention. That was unique, one of the first hybrid press conferences, and I do hope that it has been as well received as we planned. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the panelists. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon and have a good evening. Goodbye.